Dr. Sarah Chen wiped the sweat from her forehead as she looked at the strange purple plants growing near the river. The morning sun on Kepler 442b was brighter than Earth's sun, and even through her protective suit, she could feel the heat. She had been on this planet for 6 months now, studying the animals that lived here. Her job was to learn about the creatures and see if humans could live safely alongside them. The research station sat on a small hill, surrounded by tall trees with silver leaves that moved in the wind like metal chimes. Sarah loved this place, even though it was dangerous. Many of the animals here were bigger and stronger than anything on Earth, but the most interesting ones were the Vorthak. Sarah had been watching the Vorthak pack for weeks. They looked like large wolves, but they stood on 2 legs like humans. Their fur was black with blue streaks, and strange lights glowed under their skin when they were excited or angry. These lights could change colors, and Sarah was trying to understand what each color meant. The Vorthak were smart, maybe as smart as humans, and they were the strongest hunters on this planet. She set up her camera near a clearing where the pack liked to hunt. The adult Vorthak were as tall as a person, with sharp claws and teeth that could cut through metal. Their eyes were bright yellow, and they could see in the dark much better than humans. Sarah had learned to stay very far away when she watched them. Today felt different, though. The pack was acting strange. They kept looking toward the thick forest and making low sounds to each other. Sarah checked her equipment and made sure her emergency beacon was working. If something went wrong, her team could find her quickly. Through her camera, she saw something small moving in the bushes. It was a Vorthak cub, much smaller than the adults. The little creature was about the size of a house cat, but it had the same sharp claws and glowing patches as its parents. Sarah had never seen a cub this close before. It was beautiful, with soft gray fur and bright green lights flickering under its skin. The cub seemed lost. It kept calling out with small chirping sounds, but no adult Vorthak came to help. Sarah realized what had happened. The pack must have moved on during their hunt, and this little one had been left behind. She had read about this in her research. Sometimes young Vorthak got distracted and lost track of their group. Sarah knew she should stay hidden and wait for the pack to return, but the cub was getting closer to the river, where other dangerous animals came to drink. Large snake-like creatures lived in the water, and they would not hesitate to grab a small cub. She could not just watch the little creature get hurt. Moving very slowly, Sarah got up from her hiding spot. The cub heard the sound and turned toward her. Its green lights immediately changed to bright red, which Sarah knew meant danger or fear. The small creature lowered itself close to the ground and made a hissing sound. Sarah stopped moving and held up her hands to show she was not carrying any weapons. But the cub was too scared to notice. It backed away from her, moving toward the edge of the clearing. If it ran into the forest, it would be even more lost, and the dangerous animals there would smell its fear. The little Vorthak was now close to Sarah's research station. The building was small, with only 2 rooms and big windows so she could watch the outside. The cub, trying to get away from Sarah, backed up against the station's open door. With nowhere else to go, it darted inside. Sarah felt her heart beating fast. She had to get the cub out of her station before its parents came looking for it. If the adult Vorthak found their young inside a human building, they might think Sarah had trapped it on purpose. The adult Vorthak could easily break through the station walls, and they would not ask questions first. She walked slowly to the door of her station. Inside, she could hear the cub moving around, knocking things over as it looked for another way out. The poor little creature was probably even more scared now that it was trapped in an unfamiliar place. Sarah stepped inside the station carefully. The cub was in the corner of her main room, behind her desk. It had knocked over some of her equipment, but nothing looked broken. The creature's red lights were flashing brighter now, and it was making a low, growling sound that made Sarah's spine tingle with fear. Even though the cub was small, those claws and teeth were real. Sarah had seen what adult Vorthak could do to large trees, cutting through thick wood like it was paper. This little one might be scared, but it was still dangerous. The cub raised its head and looked directly at Sarah. Its yellow eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else there too. Intelligence. Sarah could tell this creature was thinking, trying to figure out what this strange human might do to it. Then the cub did something that made Sarah's blood run cold. It opened its small mouth and let out a growl that sounded exactly like its parents'. The sound was deep and threatening, designed to make enemies back away in fear. Sarah had heard this sound before when watching adult Vorthak, and it always made her want to run, but this time was different. Sarah was trapped in her own station with a scared, dangerous creature. The cub's growl seemed to fill the entire room, and Sarah knew that this moment would change everything. What she did next would determine whether she lived or died, and whether humans and Vorthak could ever trust each other. Outside, hidden in the forest, several pairs of yellow eyes watched the human building. The adult Vorthak had heard their cub's distress calls and had come to investigate. Now they waited to see what the human would do to their young. Sarah stood frozen as the little Vorthak cub growled at her. The sound was meant to frighten her, and it was working. Every part of her body wanted to either run away or grab something to protect herself. That was what any smart person would do when faced with a dangerous predator. But Sarah was not just any person. She was a scientist who had spent her whole life studying animal behavior. She knew that running would only make the cub chase her, and reaching for a weapon would make it attack. The little creature was already scared and trapped. If she made it more frightened, someone would get hurt. Instead of doing what felt natural, Sarah did something that surprised even herself. She slowly sat down on the floor of her research station. The movement was careful and gentle, making sure not to startle the cub more than it already was. When she was sitting, she was much smaller and less scary to the little creature. The cub stopped growling for a moment, confused by this strange behavior. In its short life, every time it had made that threatening sound, other animals had either run away or prepared to fight. But this human had done neither. The red lights under the cub's skin flickered as it tried to understand what was happening. Sarah pulled her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around them. This made her look even smaller and less dangerous. She kept her eyes low, not looking directly at the cub. She remembered reading that many animals saw direct eye contact as a challenge or threat. The little Vorthak tilted its head to one side, watching Sarah carefully. Its growling became quieter, more uncertain. The bright red lights under its skin began to fade to a dimmer orange color. Sarah had noticed that Vorthak lights changed color with their emotions, and orange seemed to mean confusion or curiosity instead of fear. Then Sarah began to hum. It was a simple tune that her grandmother had sung to her when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. The melody was soft and gentle, with long, slow notes that seemed to fill the room with calm. Sarah did not even think about why she was humming. It just felt like the right thing to do. The effect on the cub was immediate and strange. The little creature's ears, which had been flat against its head in fear, began to stand up straight. The orange lights under its skin started to pulse in a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to match the tune Sarah was humming. The cub stopped backing away and sat down, still watching her but no longer trying to escape. Sarah noticed the change and continued humming, even adding a second song when the first one ended. This one was a lullaby about stars and peaceful nights. She had no idea that the low, rhythmic sounds she was making were very similar to the comfort calls that parent Vorthak made to their young when they were upset or frightened. Outside the research station, 5 adult Vorthak moved closer to the building. They had been watching from the forest, ready to attack if the human hurt their young, but what they were seeing was unlike anything they had ever witnessed before. The pack leader, a large female named Shar-Ka, crept up to one of the station's windows. Through the glass, she could see the human sitting on the floor, making the strange rhythmic sounds. Her own cub, Little Kix, was sitting nearby, with his lights pulsing in the pattern that meant safe and calm. Shar-Ka called softly to the other adults in her pack. They came to the window to see for themselves. None of them could believe what was happening. They had tested many other species over the years, watching how different creatures reacted to their young. Some ran away in terror. Others tried to kill the cub to protect themselves. A few had tried to capture the young Vorthak to use as a hostage, but this human was doing something completely different. She was making herself smaller and less threatening. She was producing calming sounds that somehow their cub understood. Most importantly, she was showing no signs of wanting to hurt little Kix, even though she was much larger and could easily overpower him. The other pack members looked at Sharka with questions in their eyes. What should they do? Their cub was clearly not in danger. But this situation was unlike anything in their experience or training. Sharka watched as the human continued her soft singing. She noticed that the human's body language was similar to how young Vorthok behaved when they submitted to pack elders. The human was showing respect and making it clear that she was not a threat. Inside the station, Sarah felt her fear beginning to fade. The cub's lights were now a soft yellow-green color, which seemed much more peaceful than the angry red from before. The little creature was no longer growling, and its body was more relaxed. It was still watching her carefully, but it looked more curious than frightened now. Sarah decided to try something else. She had observed adult Vorthak making specific gestures when they greeted each other or their young. Moving very slowly, she placed one hand flat on the floor in front of her, palm up. It was a gesture of openness and peace, something she hoped the cub would understand. The little Vorthak stared at her hand for a long moment. Its lights began to change again, cycling through different colors as it processed this new information. Sarah kept humming and kept her hand in place, not moving or trying to force the cub to approach. Minutes passed. Sarah's legs were getting uncomfortable from sitting on the hard floor, but she did not dare move and risk startling the cub again. Outside, she could hear small sounds that might have been other animals, but she tried not to think about that. Her entire focus was on the little creature in front of her. The cub took a small step forward. Then another. Its lights were now a soft blue-green color, and it was making tiny chirping sounds that seemed almost musical. Sarah realized that the little creature was trying to communicate with her in return. As the cub moved closer, Sarah noticed how beautiful its fur was up close. The gray color was actually made up of many different shades, and the bioluminescent patches were intricate patterns that looked like flowing water under its skin. The little Vorthak was now just a few feet away from Sarah's outstretched hand. It stopped and tilted its head again, studying her face as if trying to read her thoughts. Sarah kept humming and tried to make her expression as kind and gentle as possible. Then, in a moment that would change both their species forever, the cub took one more step forward and gently placed its small paw on Sarah's palm. The moment the cub's paw touched Sarah's palm, everything changed. The small, soft pads of the little creature's foot were warm against her skin, and she could feel the tiny claws that could have hurt her but were now gently resting against her hand. Sarah held her breath, afraid that any movement might break this magical connection. The cub, who she now thought of as brave rather than frightening, kept its paw on her hand and looked directly into her eyes. The lights under its skin were now a beautiful soft blue, pulsing gently like a calm heartbeat. Sarah had never seen this color in her research videos of adult Vorthak, and she wondered what it meant. She continued humming, but now she also smiled. It was a gentle, genuine smile that came from her heart. The cub tilted its head and made a soft, trilling sound, almost like a purr. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. She was the first human to make peaceful contact with a Vorthak, and it was happening in the most simple, beautiful way possible. Outside the research station, the 5 adult Vorthak were having the biggest shock of their lives. Sharka, the pack leader, stepped back from the window with her mouth open in amazement. The other adults moved closer, pressing their faces against the glass to see better. What they were witnessing was impossible according to everything they knew about other species. Little Kix had just performed the touch of trust, the most sacred gesture in Vorthak culture. Young Vorthok only did this with pack members they completely trusted and accepted. They had never, ever seen it directed toward a creature from another species. Vornat, the oldest male in the pack, made a low whistling sound that meant unprecedented. He had lived for 40 seasons and had never imagined seeing such a thing. Taika and Minvor, the other hunters, were communicating rapidly in the silent light language that Vorthak used when they needed to be quiet. Sharka watched as her cub made another soft sound and actually moved closer to the human. Little Kix was now sitting right next to the strange creature, his lights pulsing in perfect harmony with the rhythmic sounds she was making. The cub looked more relaxed and content than Shar Ka had seen him in days. The pack leader made a decision. Using the light patterns under her skin, she signaled to her pack to stay alert but not to interfere. Something important was happening here. Something that could change everything they thought they knew about humans. Inside the station, Sarah was experiencing her own revelation. She had studied Vorthak behavior for months, but being this close to one was completely different from watching through cameras. She could see the intelligence in the cub's eyes, the way it was studying her face and responding to her emotions. The little creature seemed to understand that she was happy about their connection. When she smiled, its lights grew brighter. When she hummed a particularly gentle part of her song, it leaned closer to her. Sarah realized that this was not just a simple animal interaction. This was real communication between two intelligent species. Carefully, Sarah moved her other hand toward the cub. The little Vorthok watched the movement, but did not pull away. Instead, it made another trilling sound, and gently touched her second hand with its other paw. Now they were connected with both hands, and Sarah felt like her heart might burst with joy. She began to whisper to the cub in a soft, gentle voice. "Hello, little one. You're so beautiful. I'm sorry you got lost from your family. I just want to help you get home safely." She had no idea if the creature understood her words, but it seemed to respond to the tone of her voice. The cub began to make more sounds, a series of chirps and trills that sounded almost like it was trying to talk back to her. Sarah laughed softly and responded with her own gentle sounds, creating a strange but wonderful conversation between human and Vorthak. As they sat together, Sarah noticed that the cub was becoming more comfortable with her presence. It moved even closer, until it was sitting right beside her leg. The trust this little creature was showing her was overwhelming. She had dedicated her career to studying alien life, but she had never imagined that she would be the first human to make friends with one of the galaxy's most feared predators. Outside, the adult Vorthok were having an intense silent conversation using their light patterns. Shar Ka was explaining to the others what the touch of trust meant and why this was so significant. In their culture, when a young Vorthak chose to trust someone outside the pack, it meant that the entire pack should consider that individual to be a potential ally. But this had never happened with an alien species before. The pack had tested other creatures over the years, always hoping to find others who could understand their ways and share their world. Every other species had failed the test. The prey animals were too weak and frightened. The other predators were too aggressive and violent. But this human was showing something they had never seen before. She was strong enough not to run away, gentle enough not to harm their young, and wise enough to communicate in ways that little Kix could understand. She was demonstrating what the Vorthak called strength through gentleness, a quality they valued above all others. Vornat moved to Shar Ka's side and used his lights to ask a crucial question. "Should we make contact?" Shar Ka looked through the window again. Her cub was now leaning against the human, completely relaxed and trusting. The human continued to make gentle sounds, and had placed her hand lightly on Kix's back in a protective gesture. This human was treating their young with the same care and respect that pack members showed to each other. The pack leader made another decision that would change the course of history. She moved away from the window and walked to the front door of the research station. Her pack members followed, understanding what she planned to do. Inside the station, Sarah heard footsteps outside the door, heavy footsteps that could only belong to adult Vorthak. Her peaceful moment with the cub was about to become something much more dangerous. The cub heard the sounds too and lifted its head toward the door. But instead of being afraid, it made a happy, chirping sound, and its lights began to flash in a pattern that Sarah somehow knew meant family. Sarah's hands began to shake as she realized that she was about to meet the most dangerous predators on the planet, but the little cub was still leaning against her, still trusting her, and somehow that gave her courage. Whatever happened next, she had made a real connection with this small creature, and that was worth any risk. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Sarah could hear the adult Vorthak breathing, could sense their presence through the thin walls of the station. Her heart pounded as she waited to see what they would do. Then came a sound she had never heard before in all her research. One of the adult Vorthok was making the same gentle trilling sounds that the cub had been making. It was a call of peace, a sound that meant safety and welcome. The first human was about to receive a formal greeting from the most powerful predators in the galaxy. The gentle trilling sound from outside the station continued for several minutes. Sarah sat with the cub leaning against her side, both of them listening to what sounded like a conversation between the adult Vorthak. The sounds were beautiful, like a song made of different tones and rhythms. Sarah realized that the adults were not preparing to attack. They were communicating with their young through the door. The cub responded to their calls with its own soft sounds, and Sarah could tell that this was a family reunion happening in a language she was only beginning to understand. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the sounds outside changed. Sarah heard footsteps moving away from the door, but not far away. The adults were giving her and the cub space, but they were not leaving. Time passed slowly. The cub eventually fell asleep against Sarah's side, apparently feeling completely safe with her. Sarah did not dare to move and wake the little creature. She was amazed that something so young from such a dangerous species could trust her so completely. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah heard a familiar sound in the distance. It was the hover truck that her research team used to travel around the planet. Her colleagues were returning from their expedition to the southern continent. Sarah felt both relief and worry. She was happy that help was coming, but she was also concerned about how her team would react to finding her sitting with a Vorthak cub, while adult Vorthak waited outside. The hover truck got closer and closer. Sarah could hear Dr. Marcus Webb, the team leader, talking to the other scientists as they approached the station. They were discussing their findings from the day, completely unaware of the situation waiting for them. The truck stopped near the station, and Sarah heard doors opening and closing. Then came the sound of her teammates walking toward the building, their boots crunching on the ground. "Sarah?" Dr. Webb called out. "Are you in there? We've got some interesting samples to show you." Sarah tried to answer, but her voice came out as a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Marcus, I'm in here, but please approach very carefully. We have visitors." The footsteps outside stopped. Dr. Webb knew Sarah well enough to understand that something unusual was happening. "What kind of visitors? Sarah?" Before she could answer, the cub woke up and made a sleepy chirping sound. Outside, one of the adult Vorthak responded with a gentle trill. Sarah heard her teammates gasp in shock. "Sarah," Dr. Webb's voice was tight with fear. "Are there Vorthak near the station?" "Yes," Sarah replied as calmly as she could. "But please don't make any sudden movements. They're not hostile." She heard her colleagues whispering urgently to each other outside. Dr. Jennifer Park, the team's xenopsychologist, spoke up. "Sarah, we're going to call for evacuation. Just stay calm and don't do anything to provoke them." "No, wait," Sarah said quickly. "Jennifer, I need you to record everything that's about to happen. This is going to be the most important scientific discovery in human history." Very slowly, Sarah began to stand up. The cub watched her movement and stood up as well, staying close to her side. Together, they walked to the door of the station. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for the door handle. "Sarah, don't open that door," Dr. Webb called out in panic. But Sarah was already turning the handle. She opened the door slowly and stepped outside with the cub beside her. What she saw took her breath away. 5 massive adult Vorthak stood in a semicircle around the station. They were even more magnificent than she had imagined from her distant observations. Their black and blue fur gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, and the bioluminescent patterns under their skin created flowing designs that were almost too beautiful to believe. The largest Vorthak, clearly the pack leader, stepped forward. Sarah's teammates were frozen in terror behind their equipment. But Sarah felt calm. The cub beside her was making happy sounds and running toward the adults. The pack leader made the same gentle trilling sound that Sarah had heard earlier. Then, to everyone's amazement, the massive predator slowly lowered herself into a sitting position and placed one huge paw on the ground in front of her. Palm up, in the same gesture that Sarah had used with the cub. Sarah understood immediately. This was a formal greeting, an acknowledgement of what had happened between her and their young. Moving slowly and carefully, Sarah walked forward and placed her hand on the Vorthak's enormous paw. The contact lasted only a moment, but it changed everything. The pack leader's lights began to pulse in new patterns, and she began to make a series of complex sounds. Sarah wished desperately that she could understand what was being communicated. Dr. Park, still recording everything, called out from behind their equipment. "Sarah, those light patterns. They look like a structured communication system. I think she's trying to talk to you." Over the next hour, something amazing happened. Using a combination of light patterns, sounds, and gestures, the Vorthak pack leader began to share information with the human scientists. Dr. Park and Dr. Webb slowly joined the interaction, bringing translation equipment and recording devices. The pack leader, who identified herself through a specific light pattern that the team decided to call Shar-Ka, revealed things that shocked the human scientists. The Vorthak had been aware of human presence on their planet from the beginning. They had been watching human settlements and research stations for months. But more importantly, Shar-Ka explained that what had happened with the cub was a test. The Vorthak had been deliberately allowing their young to encounter different alien species to see how those species would react. Most species failed the test by either running away in fear or trying to harm the cubs to protect themselves. "They've been testing us," Dr. Park whispered in amazement as she worked to translate the communications. "All this time, they've been evaluating whether humans were worthy of contact." Shar-Ka continued her explanation, revealing that the Vorthak had a word for what Sarah had demonstrated. Through their translation efforts, the team learned that the concept translated roughly to strength through gentleness. It was a quality that the Vorthak valued above all others in potential allies. The pack leader made it clear that Sarah's reaction to their cub had been unprecedented. No other species had ever shown such a combination of courage and compassion. The touch of trust that the cub had given Sarah was sacred in Vorthak culture, and it meant that the entire pack now considered her to be family. As the sun began to set, Shar-Ka shared the most shocking revelation of all. The Vorthak had not just been testing humans on this planet, they had been protecting human settlements from other dangerous creatures, fighting off threats that humans had never even known existed. Dr. Webb sat down heavily on the equipment crate, overwhelmed by everything they had learned. "They've been our guardians all this time, and we never knew it." Shar-Ka's lights pulsed in what the team was beginning to recognize as approval. The pack leader then made a new series of sounds and gestures, and Dr. Park worked frantically to understand the meaning. "I think," Dr. Park said slowly, "I think she's making an offer. She wants to establish formal contact between our species. She's inviting us to learn from each other." Sarah looked around at her colleagues, then back at Shar-Ka and the other Vorthak. The little cub was playing happily near the adults, occasionally running over to Sarah to make sure she was still there. "Tell her yes," Sarah said quietly. "Tell her that we would be honored to learn from them." As Dr. Park worked to communicate Sarah's response, the pack leader's lights began to glow brighter than ever before. The other adult Vorthak joined in, creating a light display that lit up the entire area like a celebration. Sarah realized that this moment would be remembered forever as the beginning of a new era. Humans and Vorthak, working together among the stars. And it had all started with one scared little cub and a human who chose kindness over fear. 3 months had passed since the first contact between humans and Vorthak, and the research station had been transformed. What had once been a small outpost for studying alien animals had become the center of the most important diplomatic mission in human history. Sarah stood in the expanded common area, watching as little Kix played with a group of human children who had arrived with their families. The children were from the main human settlement, 50 kilometers away, and their parents had been nervous about letting them meet a young Vorthak. But Sarah had convinced them that Kix was completely safe. The cub, now bigger and stronger after 3 months of good care, was teaching the human children a Vorthak game that involved catching lights. Kix would create patterns with the bioluminescent patches under his skin, and the children would try to follow the patterns with their hands. When they got it right, Kix would make happy chirping sounds that made the children laugh with delight. It's amazing how quickly they adapted to each other, said Dr. Jennifer Park, who was now leading the translation and cultural exchange program. She was watching the scene while taking notes on her tablet. The children act like they've always known Vorthok, and Kix treats them like they're part of his pack. Sarah nodded, feeling proud and amazed every time she watched these interactions. The little cub, who had once been lost and frightened, was now serving as an ambassador between their species. Kix spent half his time with the Vorthak pack, learning the traditions and skills of his people, and half his time with humans, helping both species understand each other better. The formal alliance between humans and Vorthak had been approved by both species after weeks of careful negotiations. The Vorthak had shared knowledge that revolutionized human understanding of the planet. They knew where to find safe water sources, which plants could be used for medicine, and how to avoid the dangerous predators that lived in the deep forests. In return, humans had shared their technology and scientific methods. The Vorthok were particularly interested in human medical equipment and communication devices. They had their own advanced biotechnology, but they were fascinated by human engineering and manufacturing techniques. Dr. Marcus Webb entered the common area carrying a data tablet with a big smile on his face. Sarah, you need to see this. We just received a message from Earth Command. They want to send a full diplomatic team to establish a permanent embassy here. Sarah felt excitement mixed with nervousness. She had become the unofficial human ambassador to the Vorthak, and the responsibility was both thrilling and overwhelming. What does Sharka think about having more humans here? She's actually excited about it, Doctor, Webb replied. She wants to send some of her pack members to visit human settlements on other worlds. She believes that what happened here could work with other Vorthak packs throughout the galaxy. The implications of this were enormous. The Vorthok were not just powerful predators on one planet. They were part of a larger network of packs that existed on dozens of worlds across the galaxy. If humans could establish alliances with other Vorthak groups, it would open up vast new territories for exploration and settlement. Sarah walked outside to the garden area that had been created as a meeting space for both species. The garden contained both earth plants and native vegetation, creating a beautiful mix of colors and textures. Sharka was sitting in the shade of a large tree, her lights pulsing in the slow, peaceful pattern that meant contentment. Hello, Sharka, Sarah said, using the combination of sounds and light signals that she had learned to communicate in basic Vorthak language. The pack leader responded with a greeting that translated roughly to, "Hello, sister friend." Over the months, Sarah and Sharka had developed a close relationship based on mutual respect and shared concern for their people's future. Sharka stood up and moved closer to Sarah. Through their established communication methods, she began to share news that made Sarah's heart race with excitement. Other Vorthak packs had heard about the alliance with humans, and many were interested in making contact as well. But there was more. Sharka explained that the Vorthak had been in conflict with another alien species for generations. This other species, which the humans had not yet encountered, was aggressive and expansionist. They conquered worlds by destroying the existing ecosystems and killing native species. The Vorthak had been fighting this enemy alone for years, protecting dozens of worlds from invasion, but their numbers were limited, and they were starting to lose the war. They believed that an alliance with humans could change the balance of power in their favor. Sarah felt the weight of this revelation. Humans were not just gaining new friends and territory through this alliance. They were potentially becoming part of an interstellar war, but she also realized that this explained why the Vorthok had been so careful about choosing allies. They needed partners who were strong enough to fight alongside them, but wise enough to understand what they were fighting for. As Sarah processed this information, Kix came running over with the human children following behind him. The little Vorthak was carrying something in his mouth, a small device that Dr. Park had been working on. It was a translation collar that would allow Kix to speak directly in human language. Did it work? Sarah asked Dr. Park, who was approaching with an excited expression. Let's find out, Dr. Park replied, activating the device. Kix made a series of sounds, and the collar immediately translated them into clear, if somewhat mechanical, English. Sarah, friend? Play with us more? The small humans want to learn the hunting games. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she heard the young Vorthak speak in her own language for the first time. The other children cheered and clapped, amazed to hear their alien friend talking to them directly. "Of course, Kix," Sarah replied. "What game do you want to teach them?" As Kix began to explain a complex Vorthak game involving stealth and teamwork, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed. 3 months ago, she had been a xenobiologist studying dangerous alien predators from a safe distance. Now she was a diplomat, a cultural bridge between two species, and a surrogate family member to a young alien who had chosen to trust her. But more than that, she had learned something important about humanity itself. When faced with the unknown and dangerous, humans had a choice. They could react with fear and violence, or they could choose understanding and compassion. The fact that Sarah had chosen compassion had opened doors that might have remained closed forever. As the day went on, more Vorthak arrived for their weekly cultural exchange meeting. Adult pack members mingled with human scientists and settlers, sharing stories and knowledge. Children from both species played together under the watchful eyes of their parents. Sarah found herself standing next to Shar Ka, both of them watching as their respective young learned from each other. The pack leader made a soft sound that the translation system rendered as a sigh of contentment. "You think of something deep," Sarah said, using her growing Vorthak vocabulary. Shar Ka's lights shifted to a pattern that meant thoughtfulness mixed with hope. Through their communication system, she explained that she was thinking about the future. She could see a time when human and Vorthak children would grow up together on many worlds, learning from each other and becoming stronger together than either species could be alone. "The small ones show us the way," Shar Ka communicated. "They see no barriers between heart spirits." Sarah nodded, understanding exactly what the pack leader meant. The children, both human and Vorthak, accepted each other completely. They did not worry about differences in appearance or culture. They simply enjoyed each other's company and learned from their differences. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Sarah sat down at her desk to write in her research journal. This journal, which had started as a simple record of alien animal behavior, had become a historical document that would be studied for generations. She wrote, "Today marks 3 months since first contact with the Vorthak. What began as an accident has become the foundation for an alliance that could change the course of human history. But perhaps more importantly, it has shown us something about ourselves that we never fully understood. When we choose to respond to the unknown with curiosity instead of fear, with compassion instead of violence, we open possibilities that go beyond our imagination. The young Vorthak who growled at me in fear has become a bridge between our worlds. The predators we once feared have become our protectors and allies. I came to this planet to study alien life, but I learned more about human nature than I ever expected. We are not just explorers or conquerors. We are connectors, bridge builders, and peacemakers. When we are at our best, we have the power to turn enemies into friends and strangers into family. The alliance with the Vorthak is just the beginning. As we venture further into the galaxy, we will meet many different species. Some may be hostile, some may be indifferent, and some may be potential allies. But if we remember the lesson learned here, that strength can be shown through gentleness, and that trust can be earned through compassion, then humanity's future among the stars will be brighter than we ever dreamed possible." Sarah looked up from her journal to see Kix approaching her desk. The young Vorthak, now wearing his translation collar, looked up at her with bright, intelligent eyes. "Sarah, friend," Kix said through the device, "Shar Ka asks if you will help teach other humans about Vorthak ways when the new people come from the sky home." Sarah smiled and reached out to gently pet the soft fur on Kix's head. "Tell Shar Ka that I would be honored to help. And tell her that humans are very lucky to have Vorthak as friends." Kix's lights pulsed in the pattern that meant joy and gratitude. As the young alien ran back to rejoin the mixed group of human and Vorthak children, Sarah realized that she was witnessing the birth of something completely new in the galaxy. A new generation was growing up that would never know a time when humans and Vorthak were strangers to each other. These children would carry the alliance forward into the future, building on the foundation of trust and understanding that had begun with one small act of kindness toward a frightened cub. Outside, the first stars were becoming visible in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, other worlds waited to be explored. Other species waited to be encountered. Sarah felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that humanity had learned an important lesson about the power of choosing love over fear. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, and humans would face them not as conquerors, but as friends looking for other friends among the stars.